Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the garage for a quick movie review. Of course, a horror movie comes out in theaters. I go see it, and I give you a spoiler-free reaction mini review. Today, I'm going to be talking about Leigh Whannell's new reimagining of another Universal classic monster movie, Wolfman. With his marriage fraying, Blake persuades his wife, Charlotte, to take a break from the city and visit the remote childhood home. As they arrive at the farmhouse in the dead of night, they're attacked by an unseen animal and barricade themselves inside the home as the creature prowls the perimeter. But as the night stretches on, Blake begins to behave strangely, transforming into something unrecognizable. The aforementioned Blake, our lead character here, is played by Christopher Abbott, who is an actor that I have become very fond of in the last 5 years or so. Now, being that this is a spoiler-free review, let me dive in very generically. It is going to be very, very tough, actually, to tell you some of my favorite things about this movie, because that would be spoiler territory. So in this initial reaction, I will just tell you that I really liked Wolfman. I thought it was an inventive reimagining from Leigh Whannell that still brought in some of the classic lore that we are used to, especially if we are into those Universal flicks from the old days. Now, of course, this is not the first time Leigh Whannell has dove into these Universal monster flicks, as he did a reimagining of The Invisible Man back in 2020, which was during COVID, and I thought that was the greatest thing I'd ever seen, but that may have been aided a little bit in not being able to leave my house. But Leigh Whannell has done it again here. He has taken another classic tale that could very easily be vapid and shallow, but instead, he does something with that Wolfman lore where that is a secondary, almost plot beat to this film. It has a very emotional core to it, whether you're talking about the daughter's connection to her father, whether you're talking about his connection to his father, and then, of course, you could be talking about the marriage that is somewhat on the rocks here. His wife, Charlotte, is portrayed by Julia Garner, who is one of my favorite chef's kiss when I think of her as Ruth from Ozark.
You're gonna have to fucking kill me!
What Leigh Whannell employs here is a elongated kind of transformation, almost a growth to this character. Most werewolf movies, in fact, I would argue probably over 90% of them, there's a transformation scene. The full moon comes out, or they get bitten, or whatever, and they transform into this monster. However, in this new iteration, it is a much more subtle and slow burn type of transformation, where he is transforming into that creature that we are expecting, but more so, his kind of place in his family and his place in this emotional kind of mess that he's going through is also transforming. And it's a bit of an allegory in that way. Leigh Whannell did a brilliant thing with The Invisible Man back in 2020, where he really made negative space and the thought of the Invisible Man being there a fear tactic for the viewer. In Wolfman, he does something similar, where the transformation and the changing that Blake is going through in this movie is so kind of under the surface, but still very front and center, to where you don't know how it's really going to turn out, even though this is Wolfman. It wasn't just a full moon ripping my shirt off and I'm turning into a wolf. It was a much more connected transcendence for Blake in this movie. And I love that, because that really set a tone of not only hope for the character, which you would not typically think would exist in a movie like this, and it also had that overwhelming sense of dread throughout the movie, because you don't know if he's going to reach that point of no return where he truly is essentially an animal. I mentioned how much I love Julia Garner. I do think she was underused in this film. She didn't have a whole lot to do. Not being able to really talk about the last act of the film, because I definitely don't want to spoil it for anyone, but her character could have been given more to do. She could have been a little more impactful to the general outcome of the film, as opposed to just being a quiet bystander. She just kind of played the quiet wife in this movie, and it's Julia Garner, so we should be using her to her full capabilities. The child actress in the film, the young daughter, is played by, her name is Ginger in the film. She's played by Matilda F. I don't like critiquing child actors necessarily. It's usually a general consensus throughout the history of horror movies that child actors aren't really expected to carry the narratives in a lot of cases. They're not going to be winning any awards for their performances. It was a very unique way to use that character, though, because children in danger always raise the stakes. and she was definitely the most innocent and the most vulnerable character in this film. I'm a little mixed on the creature design for the Wolfman. Again, I'm staying away from a lot that I want to say, but I will just say that I don't, as I'm sitting here right now, I just saw it about 12 hours ago as I'm recording this review. I don't really know how I feel about the creature design. But with that being said, I loved the practical effects employed here. It was, as far as I could tell, looking at it on the big screen, it was all practical. No visual effects, no CGI was used in the transformation scenes, in the werewolf kind of get up. And not only that, Leigh Whannell did a great job, like I mentioned, with the negative space and Invisible Man. He does a similar thing with the camera and the sets in this movie, where he will shift the camera on a tilt. I think there was even some of those in one of the trailers to kind of give us the visual of what the character who is going through this transformation is feeling. And his body's contorting, thusly the camera's contorting for us. And it gives a very unique eye to kind of see it from his POV while still watching what he's going through. There's some great body horror in this film, just be ready. But there's some gnarly shit that happens in the movie that honestly I wasn't expecting. I was expecting more of a kind of tense, in the woods thriller, which it was, but there was a lot of really just sick, gross, and really fucking cool body horror in this film too, that I absolutely loved. At the end of the day, Leigh Whannell knows what he's doing. I mentioned in The Invisible Man, in 2018, he also directed a science fiction thriller / horror called Upgrade that I also fucking loved. And now this is the third movie in a row that he has hit the pitch out of the park. I loved Wolfman. I had a few reservations about it that I mentioned here on the review. But in summary, you got to see this thing if you love horror, if you love creature features, and if you love this kind of reimagining of old horror Hollywood. Old Hammer horror and Universal monsters are all coming back. Nosferatu, we got Del Toro's Frankenstein later this year. I mentioned that he even did The Invisible Man himself. Now he's doing Wolfman. I recommend this movie. Go see it, and see it in the theater with a big crowd, because that was a lot of fun last night to see it with a crowd of people. Took a friend of mine. He loved it. It is a crowd pleaser, and I think you will enjoy it, especially if you're into this subgenre of horror. I'm switching it up, by the way, guys, if you follow my channel. Instead of doing this out of 100 score, I'm just going to give you my score out of 10. That's what we do on the podcast. For Wolfman, I'm going to land at a 7 out of 10. It's the first new release I've seen in 2025, so we're off to a killer start. Thank you, Leigh Whannell. Thank you, Christopher Abbott. And thank you, Julia Garner, although I wish she would have been a little more prominent in this movie. Are you excited to see The Wolfman? Have you seen The Wolfman when you're watching this review? Let me know down below in the comments. And thanks for tuning in for this movie review. I'll see you guys out here next time in the garage.